Hey, economics students, I hope you're having a nice week. And today we are going to do the first of our two lessons for the week. We're going into a little bit more detail this week about personal financial management and how to manage your money, so you can be financially literate when you're going out into the world on your own. And so these next couple lessons, I'm trying to get a lot of decent information in a way that doesn't overwhelm and you can get some practical knowledge and application from it. So hopefully you find this useful. Um, and we only have really 2 weeks left. We have this week and then next week. I'm not going to assign any new assignments after next week. So by next Friday, if you have all of your assignments in, or at least as many as you plan on getting in, you're essentially done in my class then for the school year. But these last couple assignments are really good. They're really valuable lessons to learn. So hopefully, like I said, you get a lot out of them. There will be a little bit, there's a spreadsheet that I've shared with you that I'm going to have you work on this week and next week, and hopefully you find the practice of this activity worthwhile. All right. So there really isn't a whole lot new to go into, like updates. Just move into the lessons and we'll go from there. By the way, I hope everyone's doing really well. I know I've kind of stopped doing some of the weekly check-ins. But as always, if you're struggling, if you're having any issues at any point, don't hesitate to reach out, whether it's issues with our school, with my class, or whatever. All right. I know, I know these are not easy times. All right. So let's get going with our lesson today. So the next topic we're going to cover in financial literacy is the concept of expenses. Last week we covered income. And in particular, it is important that you do your best to maximize your income. And that does not mean you spend your entire life chasing a paycheck, just taking whatever job pays the most money, regardless of if you're good at it or like it or not, because you don't want to spend your life in a miserable job just so that you can make a lot of money. It doesn't make sense. You make money because it's a means of exchange. You make money because it's a way you can allocate your resources, your natural gifts, your labor, in other words. You don't make money just to make money. And so if you're in a job that you hate, just so that you can make a lot of money, your life is probably not going to maximize itself. It's certain amount of utility. All right. So as a reminder, in general, you want to maximize your income as much as possible. All right, the more money you make, generally speaking, the easier it is to pay your bills. I mean, that just kind of makes sense. It doesn't mean rich people are always able to manage your money well. It likewise doesn't mean that people who don't make a ton of income can't find ways to manage their money. It simply means the more you make, if you maximize the amount that you make, generally speaking, the easier it's going to be to pay all of your bills. And as a reminder, to maximize your income in a way that has value to your life, the first things you want to do is find an occupation you're interested in, find an occupation you have a natural talent for. Shouldn't end a sentence with a preposition. Become then highly skilled in that occupation by getting, an education in a particular field, or by getting an internship, by doing an apprenticeship, and then gain as much practical experience as possible in that occupation. If you do those four things, you will end up with a meaningful job that you are satisfied with and enjoy for the most part, and you will maximize the amount of money that you can make in that job, in that position. So that's just a recap from last week's lessons. So moving into an expense, and this is a very simple concept, but it has a lot of details that can get kind of complicated. Expenses are, simply put, all the things that we spend money on. When I buy a cup of coffee at McDonald's, that's an expense. When I pay my cell phone bill, that's an expense. When I pay my car loan, that's an expense. When I buy a cute little doggy dress for my dog Lexi, which I don't do, but my wife does, that is an expense. All right, those are all expenses. Anything that we spend money on. Generally speaking, expenses and personal finance can sort of break down into two very broad categories. If you hear that something is a fixed expense, that means that it is an expense that does not change from period to period. In other words, usually from month to month. So there's certain expenses that I pay every single month no matter what, and it's almost always the exact same dollar amount. That is a fixed expense. Generally speaking, I don't have a lot of control over my fixed expenses. I have to pay a certain dollar amount every month no matter what. I'll go into some details about what that is. Variable expenses are expenses that change a little bit from time to time, month to month. All right, so generally speaking, we typically have more control over our variable costs because, and this will make sense when you see some examples of these different types of costs. We have more control over these when we do our fixed costs. So some examples of fixed expenses, expenses that are pretty much the same every single period. Usually we think of expenses on a monthly basis. Every month I have a certain mortgage payment that I have to pay. Mortgage is a fancy way of saying I've borrowed money from a bank to buy my house, and then I have to pay that bank back with interest. We call that a mortgage payment. Rent is if instead of owning a house, if instead you rent an apartment, or essentially if you're living in a place that you do not own, and you're paying the landlord, that is what is called rent. And every month, that amount is pretty much set in stone. Every month I pay the exact same amount in my mortgage. Property taxes, again, I live in Worcester, and the Wayne County auditor charges me every month a certain amount of property tax valuation, and I pay that property tax every twice a year. It's on a biannual basis. So I pay every 6 months, I have to pay my property taxes, and by and large, it's the same amount every 6 months. If you have any sort of an insurance, like if you have car insurance or house insurance, generally speaking, you pay that once every 6 months, or sometimes 3 months or 4 months. It just depends on your auto company or your auto insurance company. Utility bills. Um, Generally speaking, I pay the same amount for my cable every month. I pay the same amount for my cell phone every month. Electricity and water are a little bit different. I do have a little bit more control over how much I pay in those two uh, expenses. Car loans, likewise, I have an agreement with a bank that I pay them a certain amount of money for them allowing me to borrow money to buy my car, and so on and so forth. Health insurance, I pay a certain amount of health insurance premiums every single month. So these are all examples of fixed expenses. Essentially, they are the same amount of money for a given pay period. A lot of them are monthly pay periods. Some of them are biannual, meaning twice a year. But regardless, those are fixed expenses. Variable expenses like groceries are an example. Every week, I usually do some grocery shopping, and I have a lot more control. I don't pay the same amount of money every week or every month or what have you, every day for groceries. Personal care items like shampoo and conditioner and deodorants. If you just don't use deodorant, you don't have to pay any money for it. You say, "Oh, that's what I go with." You know what I'm saying? Fuel for one's car. In general, that's a variable cost. Now, if you have to drive to work every single day, is it really variable or is it fixed? But again, in general, you have control over how much you drive or how much public transportation you might use. Clothing, shoes, again, you have control over how much you spend. These are variable expenses. All right, so again, you can kind of see some examples of different variable expenses, things that you have a little bit more control over, costs and expenses you have more control over in a period-to-period basis. So the idea of financial literacy, it really is not complicated, and it boils down to this: budget, budget, budget. And it sounds boring. I know a lot of you, you said, I want to know the secret to being able to have a sound financial life. And there isn't a big secret. There can be complicated investments that we can get into, but by and large, it's simple. Budget. And here's what a budget is. A personal budget is when you figure out your income, then you subtract from it the amount you plan to spend, your expenses. So you sit down, you figure out your income, usually by month, but it can even be as much as by your weekly income or your yearly income, however you want to do it, but usually by month. And then you figure out how much money you plan to spend in a month, your expenses, and you want to make sure that the income you have coming in each month is more than the expenses you're planning on spending. Then, at least once a week, you sit down with your budget. You look at the money that you are spending and you track it. You say, well, I had planned to spend, $200 on groceries this week, but looking at the receipts that I have collected throughout the week, I actually spent $300 on groceries. I am over budget. I do not, if I keep this type of spending going, I am not going to have enough money to make ends meet by the end of this month. So that's how budgeting works. All right. I know it doesn't sound that exciting, and it really isn't, but when you get used to doing it, it actually can be very, very rewarding. And you feel a sense of self-worth and you feel a sense of autonomy, a sense of efficacy that can really help you. Like most things in this world, it takes discipline and practice. It's a true, like financial literacy is no different than actual literacy, like reading literacy. It's not like there was just one magic lesson where a teacher gave you a lesson, all of a sudden you became literate. It became, you became literate by reading, by practicing, and by, taking the time to do your homework every night. That's how you became literate when it came to reading. The same is true with finance. There's no one magic lesson that I can give you that's going to make you good at managing your money. But if you sit down with discipline and you figure out a budget and you, at a weekly basis, track how well you're meeting that budget, it becomes second nature. All right. Nowadays, if you pick up, a book that was hard to read when you were a second grader, it's like second nature. You could read that and hopefully within a couple seconds. The same thing is true. Once you become with budgeting and personal financial management, once you get used to budgeting, it becomes second nature. So when you're out spending money without having to look at your budget, you have a general idea of how much you should be spending. It's kind of interesting. Now I know that there are some people that the idea of being organized like this, we call this executive functioning skills, the discipline and organization that it requires to create a budget. Not everyone is really good at that. Now, everyone should be able to do basic budgeting. Even if you don't have really great executive functioning skills, those are sort of the skills, executive functioning skills are the skills that people have that allow them to be disciplined and stick to a schedule. Um, but if you are not, if for whatever reason you try to budget in your life and you just can't, there are people that you can hire to help you called financial planners. And a good financial planner is quite literally worth their weight in gold. They can help you figure out how to manage your money. And we'll go into that a little bit later, the different types of people that can help people with money. So today what we are going to do, and for the rest of the next 2 weeks, I created a spreadsheet based on a very basic budgeting concept called the 50-30-20 budget. And this is not an amazing, groundbreaking, earth-shattering budget. But I do want you to at least have a general idea of what it means to create a budget so that when you go out there in the real world, you have a general idea of what you need to be doing to live within your means and to be able to allocate resources in a way that you can maximize the value of the value, the meaning, I should say, the meaning and value of your life. So this idea of a 50-30-20 budget, it's a relatively new budgeting plan. It's made famous. There's a senator, Senator Elizabeth Warren. She's a Democrat, and this budget is a little bit controversial simply because anytime you bring politics in anything, people are going to reflexively not like certain things. And because this was something Elizabeth Warren has promoted, there are some people who just vehemently don't like it because they don't like her. And it is not a perfect budget. It has its critics, and it sounds dumb, a critic of a budget. The reality is that there are lots of different types of ways to budget your money. There's a lot of different professional experts that have come up with different sort of budgeting tools and budgeting structures. The key is to find the one that works best for you. This is a very simple concept that I'm going to kind of use here just to introduce you to the idea of budgeting. I'm not saying this is like the end all be all of budgets and you need to stick with this. This is the greatest thing. There are parts of it that I really, really don't like, actually. And here's how the 50-30-20 budget works. All right. The idea is that 50% of your monthly income after taxes should be spent on all of your needs, your basic needs. We're talking bare bones needs. All right. The need for shelter, the need for food, the need for clothing. That's about it. All right. What are the basic things you have to pay, or else either A, you won't be able to survive because you won't have shelter or food, or B, you'll get thrown in jail because you're violating some sort of an agreement you've made with the bank. 30% of our income should be allocated to wants. All right, so we have our needs, which are the things we really need for survival or to not get thrown in jail. Wants are those things that the way we express our needs. All right, so one of the things we need clothing to survive. I mean, we need, basic clothing and shelter, but we might want a specific brand of shoes, or we might want a specific style of car. All right, so 30% of our budget should be based on our wants. Not necessarily, when you say wants, it's not necessarily like our, pie in the sky, luxury lifestyle. And then the other 20% of our after-tax income should be put into savings or some sort of a payment on our debt. And savings and the way I interpret this budget, you have different people interpreting it differently, would also include investments and assets. Because you shouldn't, like savings accounts are important, but you're kind of, if you put too much money in savings, you're actually not making a sound financial decision. If you have a lot of money that you can like just dump into a savings account, sometimes it's better to put that somewhere else. All right, so here's what I'm going to have you guys do today. I'm going to show you a little bit of a 50, 30, 20 budget spreadsheet, and I want you to fill out the fields that are highlighted in yellow. So here we go. All right, so each one of you has your own copy of this. This is again the 50, 30, 20 budget. And today what I want you to do is I want you to fill out the anything that is highlighted in yellow for right up here for your estimated yearly income, for your common needs, and for your wants. Don't worry about savings and debt. We're going to go into that the end of this week, beginning of next week. All right. So last week I asked you to find an occupation you're interested in and estimate, find the estimate for the average income that you would make as an entry level, whatever the field was you found. All right, and I want you, whatever that amount was, if you need to go back and relook at that, you can, or you can just sort of guesstimate if you kind of remember. I'm not going to like grade you on making sure you have the exact right number there, but let's say you wanted to be a teacher. In general, the average starting teacher salary, say, is $32,000. So you would put 32,000 right in there. All right, so again, you only have to do the things that are highlighted in yellow. Do not do anything else. Everything else auto-populates. All right. So as you can see, you have $32,000 as your estimated yearly income. I have a little bit of an equation. It's not that great, but I have a little bit of an equation that will tell you what your yearly income is after tax. At $32,000 a year, I'm roughly estimating that you'll get enough tax credits that you're going to break even. It might be accurate, it might not. And then it's going to tell you your monthly income after tax. So again, you don't have to do this. That's already auto-populated. So if you make $32,000 a year, you'll have about $2,600 a month to spend. So each month, half of that should be spent on your needs. So half of $2,600 is about $1,300. So you should be spending about $1,300 on your needs. All right, 30% of this should be on your wants. So 30% of 2,600 is $800. So you have $800 a month to spend on your wants. And then you'd have 20% of this, which would be about $533 to spend on savings and repayment of debt. All right, so what I want you kids to do, I want you to figure out just whatever this number was that you found out last week for your estimated yearly income. That is your income. That's the first thing you need to do when you create a budget. Figure out what is your income. All right, and then come down here and enter in your estimate about how much you estimate you will spend on your needs. You have $1,300 that you should be able to budget to pay for nothing but your needs. All right, so I already for you put the average costs for the average 21-year-old. So if the average 21-year-old got an apartment all by themselves, they'd have to pay $550 in rent for that month. So right away, our budget just went from $1,300 for the month. Now we're down to $783. The average person spends about $250 on groceries. The average person has about a $200 car payment. The average person has to pay about $100, I don't know, it'd be a month, that might be a little bit high, in car insurance. The average person might be paying about $100 a month per gas. If you have to borrow money to go to college, the average student has to pay $350 in college loan payments. All of a sudden, you can see as I'm entering in amounts on this column right here, it is It is auto-populating. It is summing it all up to see the amount of money that I am planning on spending. And all of a sudden, after I just paid these couple basic common needs, I'm already planning on spending more than I'm making. So that's an issue. I have to find a way to make this amount of money fit uh, with my expenses down here. All right. So your assignment first, again, put in your estimated yearly income. All right. It will already tell you how much you need to spend, and as soon as you spend too much, this green number will turn red. All right, but try to figure out how you would spend for these basic needs so that you would match whatever it is that you need to match it up with your budget here. All right, then come over and do the same thing with your wants. And you can add whatever wants you want to add. So you have $800 to spend on your wants. How much of that do you want to spend at restaurants? How much do you want to spend on your food beyond your basics? How much are you willing to donate to church, to charity? Some people tithe, meaning they give 10% of their monthly earnings to church. All right, and so 10% of the monthly earnings. So again, our monthly earnings about 2,600 is about $266, a month right there. So it's really up to you. So the only other thing that I want you to do, as you're sort of filling in these different columns, particularly over here, when you're estimating your needs, if you put in a number less than the average, I want you to explain how you're going to hold your costs down. All right, and here I'm going to show you. I did this myself. I made this work on $32,000 a year. All right, and here's what I did to make these numbers add up. All right, so I decided that I was going to have a roommate, that together we were going to, and this might not be realistic, all right, so this is kind of goofy, but to make this work, I lowered my rent payment by half because I'm going to get a roommate and split my costs with the roommate. I decided that I'm going to live on nothing but ramen noodles and tuna. And so I'm cutting my basics, my very bare bone basic food to $150 a month. That's nuts. But again, I could come over here on my wants and add a little bit more so that I can get, upgrade to the really nice albacore tuna. Maybe I already own a car. I don't have a car payment. All right, I don't have a loan. I already have a car. My parents got me a car for graduation, perhaps, or maybe I bought my own car, some old clunker. So I don't have a car payment. I do have to pay about $100 a month in car insurance. I still have to pay for gas. Instead of paying $350 a month for student loans, I'm going to estimate maybe $150. So I'm either going to pay my way through college or I'm going to go to the branch for a couple years so that I don't have huge debts, so I don't have to pay student loans as much. Health insurance, it's pretty much set at $250. I feel as though my basic clothing at about $100 a month is pretty spot on. Um, the one thing I absolutely hate about this concept of needs, of this 50, 30, 20 idea, is that uh, the need here is that um, we are expected to pay, or I should say a person is expected to pay only the bare minimum on their credit card payments. And then if they want to pay more than that, that's over here in this column, which I think is silly. I'll explain that way more in detail later. But so I'm going to keep my credit card use to a minimum and not have to pay that much. And essentially, I think I can knock some money off of my cell phone bill, and then I'm splitting the cost of my utilities with my roommate. So by um, so again, splitting the costs with my roommate. So I'm able to stay within this pretty tight budget. All right, $32,000 a year is is decent money, and you can live on it by for sure. But it's also, especially if you have a pretty hefty school loan payment, it's not going to be the easiest thing to do. Now, again, if you make like $50,000 a year, now I'm deducting a little bit for taxes, probably not as much as I should. But all of a sudden, when I'm making $50,000 a year, this becomes a lot easier. Now this very same budget at $50,000 a year, I'm actually coming in, I have $565 that I can play with. So I can go ahead and buy more groceries. I can afford a bigger student loan payment. Um, and so yeah, you can kind of see how much easier it is to make a budget the bigger that number is. All right, so I know hopefully this, I want you to do this assignment don't stress out over it and have some fun with it. I know it sounds odd having fun with it, but get an idea for what it's like to actually create a budget. This is not necessarily set in stone. This isn't the world's greatest budget or anything of that nature at all. But get used to understanding your income. Get used to figuring out what you need to spend money on. Figure out how much you're spending on those needs and make sure that it's not costing you more than about 50% of your income. And if it is, you need to sort of reevaluate how you're meeting your needs. Then figure out how you'd want to use your wants, and we'll worry about savings a little bit later. All right, so um, the assignment for today, fill in these columns here. Feel free to add any more things that you feel as though I forgot, like I don't have homeowners insurance. So there are a lot of things I don't have here that it probably needs. If there are any other wants you can think of that you want to add in here, add those in, and then we'll meet again at the end of the week and talk about what it means to save money and invest money. Next week, then we're going to talk way more about debt and credit cards. This is, I kind of like the 50-30-20 concept. I hate, though, this idea of the minimum credit card payment. Just if all you do is make minimum credit card payments, um, and you're not paying off your balance, you're like lighting your money on fire. But I get it. Like sometimes life happens. So anyway, okay, that's really about the end of it. So if you have any questions at all, let me know. And yeah, hope you're having a nice week. I will talk to you all soon.